When I bought my house in Oak Ridge Estates, I knew I'd have to deal with a homeowners association. What I didn't know was that it meant dealing with Barbara Winters, or, as the neighborhood not so secretly called her, the HOA Karen. Barbara had been HOA president for 5 years, ruling our quiet suburban community with the precision of a dictator, and a rulebook she rewrote whenever it suited her next vendetta. My first encounter with her came just 3 days after moving in. I was still surrounded by unpacked boxes when there was a sharp, rhythmic knock at my door. On the porch stood a woman in her late 50s. Hair perfectly styled, pearls glinting in the sunlight, a smile that looked more rehearsed than real. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates," she said, her voice syrupy but cold. "I'm Barbara Winters, president of the Homeowners Association. I noticed your garbage bins are still visible from the street. According to Section 4, Paragraph 3 of our community guidelines, all bins must be stored out of sight within 24 hours of collection." I apologized, explaining that I was still settling in and would move them right away. Instead of accepting that, Barbara handed me a printed copy of the HOA rulebook, 78 pages thick, along with a yellow courtesy notice that looked suspiciously like a parking ticket. "Just so we start off on the right foot," she said with that tight smile. "We pride ourselves on maintaining the highest standards in Oak Ridge. It protects all our property values." That was my introduction to life under Barbara's reign. Over the next few months I got slapped with notices for everything. My grass half an inch too long, my garage door left open for more than 15 minutes while unloading groceries, even for leaving a hose visible in the side yard. But things really escalated when I bought my Tesla Model 3. It was a reward to myself after a big promotion at my architecture firm. Sleek, silver, and eco-friendly. I installed a charging station in my garage, did everything by the book, HOA approval, licensed contractors, full compliance. What I didn't expect was Barbara's bizarre hatred of electric vehicles. At the next HOA meeting, she proposed a new rule banning unsightly charging equipment and requiring all cars parked in driveways to match the community's traditional aesthetic. When someone asked what that meant, Barbara shot a glare my way. "Traditional vehicles," she said, "ones that don't make the neighborhood look like some kind of futuristic experiment." Her proposal was voted down. Several residents owned hybrids or EVs, and even her usual supporters thought it was too extreme. As the meeting adjourned, Barbara marched over to me, smiling tightly. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed quietly. "Turning my own board against me? This neighborhood ran smoothly until you showed up with your fancy car and your progressive ideas." I blinked, stunned. "Barbara, I'm just trying to live my life. I followed every rule." "We'll see about that," she said before spinning on her heel and walking away. The next morning, I noticed something wrong as I walked toward my car parked in the driveway. My stomach dropped. A deep, jagged scratch ran along the entire driver's side door, and tucked under the windshield wiper was a note that read, "Gas guzzlers only. Take your eyesore elsewhere." Rage burned in my chest, but I forced myself to think clearly. I had no proof. Not yet. What Barbara didn't know was that my Tesla's dashcam recorded automatically whenever it detected motion. I pulled up the footage and hit play. There she was, Barbara Winters, in high definition, sneaking up to my car at 3:13 a.m. She wore a dark tracksuit, her hair tucked under a baseball cap, but the camera caught her face clearly. She leaned in to place the note, then pulled out her keys and carved the paint, twice, before admiring her handiwork and slipping back down the street toward her house. I watched the video 3 times, each replay confirming what I already knew. For months, Barbara had made my life miserable with petty harassment and power games. Now, finally, I had hard proof of who she really was. Instead of confronting her directly, I decided to be strategic. First, I called my insurance company to report the vandalism and sent them the dashcam footage. Then I phoned the non-emergency police line to file a report. The damage exceeded $2,000, enough to make it a felony in our state. When Officer Rodriguez arrived, I showed him the footage. His brows lifted as he watched Barbara Winters in her midnight disguise. "You're certain this is your HOA president?" he asked, still staring at the screen. "Positive," I said. "We've had several run-ins. She even tried to ban electric cars at the last meeting." He nodded, taking notes. "We'll need to speak with Ms. Winters. This is clear-cut vandalism, and given the cost of the damage, it's a serious charge." I asked if I could be present when they confronted her, but Officer Rodriguez shook his head. "Best to let us handle it. If you're there, it might escalate things." So I watched the cruiser drive off and wondered how Barbara would react when the police showed up at her perfectly pruned colonial with the symmetrical hedges. I didn't have to wonder for long. That afternoon, my phone blew up with texts from neighbors. Barbara had been visited by the police and was seen being escorted to a patrol car, not in handcuffs but visibly shaken and protesting loudly. She'd apparently denied everything until the officers mentioned video evidence. Then her indignation turned to panic. The next day, Detective Simmons called to update me. "Barbara Winters has been charged with criminal mischief," he said. "She'll be arraigned next week. She's out on her own recognizance but has been instructed not to contact you." That didn't stop her from trying. That evening, her husband Greg came to my door. He was a quiet man with tired eyes, the kind of person who looked perpetually weighed down by someone else's decisions. "Look," he began awkwardly, twisting his wedding ring. "Barbara made a terrible mistake. She's under a lot of pressure with the HOA, and sometimes she gets carried away. We'd like to pay for the damages and any inconvenience this caused. In return, maybe you could consider dropping the charges." I listened politely but shook my head. "I appreciate the offer, Greg, but this isn't just about the money. Barbara's been targeting me, and others, for months. Actions have consequences. She needs to face them." He nodded, clearly expecting that answer. "I understand. Honestly, I've been telling her for years she takes the HOA too seriously. Maybe this will finally be the wake-up call she needs." 2 days later, the HOA called an emergency meeting. Barbara was conspicuously absent. The vice president, Walter, a retired judge with a steady voice, stood at the front of the packed community room. "In light of recent events involving our board president," he began, "we are holding a vote to determine her continued eligibility to serve. The bylaws clearly state that any board member engaged in illegal activity against a resident may be removed by a 2/3 majority." The vote wasn't even close. Barbara Winters was unanimously removed from the board. Several residents, emboldened by recent events, shared their own stories of her intimidation, favoritism, and rule manipulation. It was like a dam breaking. Years of quiet frustration finally spilling out. After the meeting, Walter approached me personally. "On behalf of the HOA, I'd like to formally apologize," he said. "We'll cover any deductible or out-of-pocket expenses related to the incident. Barbara's actions were her own, but as a board, we failed to rein her in. For that, we're sorry." I accepted the apology, feeling a deep sense of relief and closure. As I walked out of the clubhouse, I spotted Barbara sitting in her car at the far end of the parking lot. She'd clearly been waiting for the meeting to end. Our eyes met through her windshield. Her face was pale, her expression brittle with humiliation. The mask she'd worn for years, the control, the authority, was crumbling. Then her phone rang. I watched as she answered, her face shifting from anger to shock. Later, Greg told me it had been her boss from the real estate agency. The local news had run a story titled, "HOA President Arrested for Vandalizing Electric Vehicle." Her name and profession were right there in the article. The company, which prided itself on ethical business and had just launched a green initiative, placed her on unpaid leave pending review. As I walked toward my freshly repaired Tesla, I glanced back one last time. Barbara was slumped forward, her forehead resting on the steering wheel, shoulders trembling. The reality had finally hit her. One act of spite had unraveled everything she'd built her identity around. The woman who spent years enforcing rules on others had just learned the most important one of all. Even HOA presidents aren't above the law.